And it's actually been so bad for one of the subscribers on here that they actually took it back to the dealership. That is a lot of stuffing around to be able to do something that should be quite simple. Not a complete write-off, so I'd say, yeah, something like a 5 out of 10. Do not get me started. I think this is gonna be a collector's vehicle 15, 20 years from now. This vehicle just works. There's some things you just can't put, you know, you can't put a finger on. G'day guys, it's Mark here from North Oz, and ever since I picked up this 2023 Hilux Rogue here 6 months ago, I've had a lot of questions and there's been a lot of curiosity, both on YouTube in the comment section, but also just driving around as well. A lot of people want to know what I think of this 2023 Rogue. So what I've done is I put together a very comprehensive list of everything in structured categories, of everything that I like and I dislike about it, and basically what I have found after living with this vehicle for a little bit over 6 months now. So let's get stuck into it. So for those of you who are new to the channel, the very first vehicle that we had on here was a 2008 Nissan Navara. Then we traded that in for a 2021 Land Cruiser Prado, which was a little bit more reliable and was able to get us out and do a lot of trips very reliably. And then we ended up trading that in for this, which is a 2023 Hilux Rogue. Now, I've made many videos as to why I made the switch from the wagon to the ute. So if you want to check those out, you can. I've also been very fortunate to have experience with rival competitors for this ute, such as a Holden Colorado, which I've spent quite a bit of time in. And I've also been very lucky to have driven around in a SR version of this vehicle, so fairly recent. So I've got a pretty good and I guess base for comparison to be able to compare this vehicle to other vehicles, both in the lineup, but also in other markets as well, and other brands as well. Now, with that out of the way, let's start working our way through the long list of review items I've got on here. And let's just start off with the interior. And I really like this interior, guys. The black on everything, even the chrome is blacked out, which is awesome. That is all I have ever wanted from every car I've ever owned, is make the pillars the same color as a roof liner, make the roof liner the same color as the sun visor, but also the same color as the sun visor mounts. I don't know why some car companies can't get their act together. They just can't seem to put everything in dark shades. It's like, oh, I have to put at least one mount a beige color. I don't get it. Anyway, this vehicle though, even the chromes are like a black chrome, and I really appreciate the fact that this is a classy interior. You can even see, the leather seats I've spoken about many times before as well. They are very comfortable. I like them a lot, which we'll talk about in a second. But the interior lighting down here is brilliant, and it works well with this brushed aluminium on the fascias that we've got all around here, these little interior panels. So in general, and I've made very, very in-depth and specific videos about every single piece in here and also around the car. So if you want to have a look at a very detailed review of this vehicle, so you can go ahead and click up there or wait till the end of the video. Now, the ergonomics of this vehicle is good, but not better than my Prado. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I find the seating position and stuff is fine. Sits a little bit higher than the Prado, of course, due to the different chassis, but I find the aircon units are just out of place. You know, the top ones are in a good spot, but they're not the same design as the Prado. And I don't know why, because the ones in the Prado are excellent, but they're just too small. They don't reach all the way over to the driver. They kind of reach about here. They don't reach all the way over, and that bothers me a little bit. And on the side here, it kind of, the whole dash faces more towards the right. So even if I move this all the way to the left, it's still pointing down and to the left. So I don't understand what they did with the air cons there. I don't find the air cons as good as my Prado. However, apart from that, I find the ergonomics of the interior of this vehicle are excellent. And I do want to talk about things like the seat. This seat is a very good seat, and I think that seat comfort is very underrated in a lot of reviews, but it's where we spend most of our time, guys. You know, if you have a bad seat, you know about it straight away, and they're selling Land Cruisers for 80, 85,000 that have terrible seats in them. So for this, you actually get a really good seat. You get electrical adjustability, which is fantastic. The only downside I would say is no lumbar adjustment, but I'll get to that in a second. But you do have thigh support adjustment, which I think is a bigger deal, and it's more underrated than lumbar support, because it means that I can change the angle of the support on my thighs, which is excellent because it means that I'll be able to take more or less pressure off my thighs and off my bum, because that's always the first place that gets sore. So changing that on the run is excellent and very good. So we'll keep moving along in our list here. Now I want to talk about the speaker system in here. Those eagle-eye viewers out there, you spotted it straight away. There is no JBL little sticker on this head unit, and that's because a bit of a reason why I got this vehicle sooner than other people is because this is the non-JBL model. You actually have to option it. Most of them came with it anyway, but you'll see if you did get a JBL option, you'll see a little charge on there. Now, I get a lot of questions saying, is the JBL system better than this system? And to those people, I say probably. But in terms of do I notice it? Like, is it like a really bad sound in here? Absolutely not. If I had two vehicles side by side, one with JBL, one without, sure, you'd probably tell the difference. But it's all about what you can live with. And and what you don't know can't hurt you, sort of a thing. So when you're in here, they've got the tweeters at ear level, so I can hear things like podcasts, and I can hear the higher frequencies, and I can hear the words very clearly. But then, if you want a little bit more bass and stuff, you've got the bigger speakers in the bottom, and they produce a bit more sound down low. So I find that the speaker system, while it is severely worse than my Prado, because the speaker system of the Prado was unreal, but the speaker system in here is just fine, and if you're listening to podcasts, you're listening to music, you'll find that you don't have to crank it all the way up to 100% to be able to listen to it, and it distorts. It doesn't do any of that. It works completely fine. So that's probably been one of the biggest questions I've had on this vehicle is, how do I find the non-JBL system? And the non-JBL system is perfectly adequate. If you want to change it later on, you always can. But in my opinion, for me personally, I find it completely adequate. Now, coming back to the seats, like I said, I think that this is a better seat than the Prado seat. And I've had my dad, who has a 2022 Prado, I've had him sit in here, and he agrees as well. This is a nicer seat to be in. And I don't know what it is, but it just seems like you sit in a better spot. Might be the leather giving you a little bit more comfort. I don't know. But the one thing that this does not have, like I mentioned before, was no lumbar adjustment. And that is a little bit annoying. I would say that the lumbar, support on this vehicle is probably on the more positive side as opposed to the negative side. So what I mean by that is it's giving you a little bit more on the more support side as opposed to being in a more neutral position or having no lumbar support at all. So on the scale, I would say it's got a little bit more support than if you were in the Prado and had no lumbar support, like turned all the way to the very, very back. It's got probably halfway. So it's kind of stuck on that setting. Now, I don't have a problem with it. On longer trips, sometimes I would like to change that lumbar setting just to give me a little bit more of a better posture, but I just kind of do that myself. And if you want to stick something behind your back, like a pillow or something, you could always do that. But for me, I would much rather have the thigh support as opposed to the lumbar support. That's my personal opinion after owning these two vehicles back to back. Now, with the head unit, so coming back to the head unit, these are negative points, obviously, in case you haven't picked up on that. The head unit is very difficult to see when there is light behind you, which is kind of almost all the time. Now, this is a big problem in the Ford Rangers, is that they have a very big screen as well. I believe theirs is glossy, but I'm not too sure about that, so I won't speculate. But they have the same issue as well with the light behind, making it difficult to see. And when it is such a small screen and you've got the light behind you and you're trying to see what's going on, if it's really late in the day and you've got the light of the sun directly on here, you've got no chance of looking at this. I'm telling you that right now. So that's a little bit of an annoyance for me, something that I've noticed, especially over the last couple of days where I've been, backing in and out of some tricky spots. Having the light straight on there, it has been so annoying. So that's been one of the things for me, is that car manufacturers need to figure out a better angle for this, or they need to try to get some sort of anti-glare protection or something on there so we can actually see what we are doing. So this next point has been a very big complaint, and it may be one of the biggest problems with this vehicle, and it's the dashboard cracking and creaking. Now, doesn't sound good, does it? I notice it, especially over certain angles. When I keep coming down the same way to work, I hear the exact same crack at the exact same point. Don't know if it's because of the sun hitting it or if it's because the vehicle's on a certain angle. I'm not too sure, but I will hear this dashboard creak and crack. And once you notice it, you can't unhear it. So, but if you have the speakers going, you're having a conversation with the person next to you, or you got the kids rattling around the back, whatever's going on, you won't hear it. But if you are dead silent in the vehicle, it will drive you absolutely crazy. And it's actually been so bad for one of the subscribers on here that they actually took it back to the dealership and got a brand new dashboard, only to find that it was cracking as well. So cracking and creaking and making those noises. So a little bit of a fitment issue, a little bit of a build quality issue as well. So just be aware that if you do pick up this vehicle, you very well may have the creaking and cracking noises. A strange ticking noise I find in here as well, right next to my knee, down near the transmission. I don't know what it is. It just ticks every now and then. And again, if it's dead silent in here, you notice it. So if you're just driving down the road, you'll hear every now and then a weird little click coming from the transmission tunnel. Don't know what it is. It's not the cruise control. I know that on my Prado it was a cruise control. So that's something that I need to investigate as well. And if you guys have a Rogue as well and you hear the same clicking noise, you let me know. It kind of builds up. It goes and then clicks. Don't know what it is. Not changing gears, so I don't know what it is. So anyway, so there are a few little of those little creaks and cracks and ticks and stuff going on in here, but I'll explain at the very end why I kind of like that. And it's a bit of a strange explanation. You're going to have to bear with me on that. Now, the other thing that I really don't like, and luckily I don't have any kids, or I've never actually taken passengers in the rear before anyway, is the lack of legroom. There is very little to no legroom in the back of these utes, and it surprised me. Obviously, coming from a wagon, you expect that there's a lot of legroom back there, but there really isn't. And you sit so high up. It's very strange. So bit of a strange one. And also not having the rear part of the seats fold down is still baffling. I put that in the 5 things I hate about this vehicle, and I still hate that. The fact that those rear seats can't just fold down so you can put things behind them, or even just to put like a lithium setup in there, instead of had to put the lithium on the actual back seat. And I've had to get a lead acid battery to sit under the bonnet because there's just nowhere to put a lithium battery. Now, of course, yes, you can take out the whole, unbolt the whole rear panel of it, but then it's not readily accessible. So a little bit of a problem. I know that there are some kits that you guys can get, that we can get to make it fold up and down, but they looked really messy to install. I didn't want any part in that. That concludes the interior section of this video. So let's go outside now and check out the exterior. Let's do it. Now, before we move on to the exterior of this vehicle, can I get you guys to do me a massive favor? Can I get you to go ahead and click that like button and also subscribe? It helps me out in more ways than you could possibly imagine. Thank you so much for watching, and let's get into the exterior of this 2023 Hilux Rogue. Let's get into it. So unlike the interior, where for everything that I liked, there was probably something that I disliked, as all vehicles are, with the exterior of this, although the wide body is sick, which we'll talk about in a second, although the styling of this is unreal, there are a lot of things that come with that I also dislike. So we're gonna get stuck into that now. Now, I think Toyota have absolutely knocked it out of the park with the styling of this Hilux. And I've always felt that the models before this, so the SR5s, I always felt that those bodies were a little bit too narrow for my liking. But this obviously takes it completely up another notch and another level with making these huge over fenders. And I think that they've done a terrific job with the general styling. They've made it very cohesive. So a lot of the colors that they've used, they continue to use in different areas, such as, you've got this gray color here. It also matches the snorkel. You know what I mean? You got the gray color here, you got the gray color here, you got that same material. It's kind of like a metallic-y sort of plastic. You've got that on the door handles. It's very similar to the trimmings for the side step. It's the same material they use on the front as well. So, and also the rear fairings on the very back there, they are a metallic-y, glossy sort of version of that too. So, what they've done with the general styling has been fantastic, and I absolutely love the wide body. I've seen more and more of these Rogues getting around now, and getting behind them is pretty awesome because you get to have a bit of a look at it and see kind of what it looks like from the other perspective, and they look so tough out there on the roads. I'm gonna start off with my list of dislikes, and these are things that, although may seem like small problems now, some of these things can be really big problems later on, quite costly as well. The very first thing I wanted to talk about was the material that they used on that exact same material I was talking about, the same one that they use here, and also on the highly touched areas, which I just don't understand why they chose to use a porous material for the highly touched areas. Because if you've got any sort of grease, or like, for example, I wear sunscreen a lot. So I touch the handles and it's actually made it's actually faded parts of the door handle, and and also when you're using waxes and stuff around the vehicle, it's a porous material, it just soaks in. So I don't know why. I struggle to understand what was Toyota's reasoning behind putting a porous material on here. And listen, I'm probably going to have to, within probably the next couple of years at least, so I'm planning on hanging on to this vehicle for a very long time, I'm probably going to have to sand back this top layer here and hit it with some sort of spray, whether it's definitely a color spray, whether it's a black or a color matching spray. I'm not too sure. I think color matching spray would look pretty cool, to be honest, but I just don't understand why they chose to do that. And it's not something that you can just I'm sure that you could easily pop off and replace them if you wanted to, but why would you want to do that? Why wouldn't you just make it painted to begin with? So that's frustrated me a little bit, as you can probably tell, that I just don't understand why they chose to use a porous material on the most heavily used parts of the vehicle, even on the under sections here as well. It's just going to absorb anything that you run over or anything that you have touched. Now, with all these dislikes, of course, I'm going to say, but remember, it is a wide body, so that is pretty cool, and it is the cost of having the wide body. But the other thing that I've found very, very frustrating, besides the porous materials on here, the other thing I found very frustrating is the fact that it's actually really hard to park this thing. And it's purely because the body is if you had a standard Hilux body, it would be fine to park. And when you have also the camera that helps you guide in, it's got the 360 camera, which I'll talk about in the technology section of this video. When you park it, it seems fine, but your margins are so narrow because of how far that sticks out. And I'll put a picture. I parked it's just a standard car park when I went into town, and I'll put some pictures up there of how much I parked perfectly dead center, just to demonstrate for you guys how little room there was on each side. So parking this thing, if you're not very good at parking, or you're a bit nervous about parking in tight spots at work or whatever, this thing's going to get absolutely dented up. So be careful of that. If you're someone who has a workplace or something where there's a lot of cars in a small area, this is not the vehicle for you. For one, it's crazy long, but also two, with the Rogue, it's also crazy wide. So keep that in the back of your mind. If you want to purchase this vehicle and you've got tight spaces, you might want to opt for an SR5. So keep that in the back of your mind. Now, the other thing is the turning circle on this makes it even harder to park as well. The turning circle on this, I've never been in a vehicle with worse turning circle. My Patrol with 33s on it is easier to park than this thing. And this has got standard wheels on it, hilariously small wheels. It's got tiny wheels on it, and it's the turning circle on this and the offset of them are really positive, so it's pushed really far into the center line of the vehicle. And it is so hard to turn this vehicle. I actually need to go out and if you want to turn on a standard road, standard Australian lane road, and you want to turn and you just want to do a U-turn, forget about it. You need 2 lanes, or you need to go really, really wide into the pedestrian lane and then go all the way around. And even then, you're going to go into the pedestrian lane on the other side of the road. The turning circle on this is insane. That's something I didn't even test when I took it for a drive, obviously, because, in my mind, I just thought that it was a given that it would at least turn normal. But I've, obviously found out as I've owned the vehicle for 6 months that the turning circle on this is hilarious, and I still get it wrong. Every single time I drive this vehicle, I try to park it, I'm always going in and out, in and out, in and out. So that just gives you a bit of an idea. The turning circle on this is if anyone says it's bad, it's worse than you think it is. Believe me on that. Now, if you want to set or put a lower offset wheel on here, which I will be doing because the wheels are hilariously tiny. If you want to put a bigger lower offset wheel on it to try to fill out these massive guards, you're going to have an even worse turning circle again. So I can't wait to see how that goes. Hopefully they make the roads wider where I am, because I'm going to need it. And of course, the other thing as well I've already mentioned is the wheels and tires are hilariously tiny. I love what they've done with the styling of this wheel. It's black and it's got the black chrome on it too. Awesome. The NK wheels, love them. I'm a big time Japanese performance guy. I love the fact that these are NK wheels, but I also don't love the fact that they are so tiny. Why do they make the offset on them so small? So anyway, it's an off-road vehicle and they made the wheels tiny and they look like rubbish. And everyone, you know, I cop so much flack for it. Everyone's like, why are the wheels so small? It's like, well, you can't make it any bigger because it fouls. If you go for a bigger wheel and tie it on a stock suspension, it actually fouls horizontally. So anyway, we'll talk about that when we get to suspension anyway, but just so you guys know, turning circle on this is terrible. If you want a reasonable sized wheel on this thing, it's going to make it even worse. Now, although I kind of ranted and raved a little bit and I got a little bit irate in that last part, there were, and you know, rightfully so, because there's some design features on here that still make no sense to me, but I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't trade it for a narrow vehicle. If you still gave me the choice of all those negatives of the wide body compared to a standard ute, I would say yes, I would still take the wide body. They're just little things that you guys have to be aware of, and this is why I'm doing this video, is so you guys can be aware of all of the, you know, aspects, all the likes and dislikes, and you know, so you guys have the knowledge to make a calculated decision for yourselves. So now we're going to move on to the rear section, which is probably my favorite section and probably the most hated section of this vehicle, which is the tray. Let's get stuck into it. So moving on to the tray, which is one of the most talked about features of this ute, but not for the reasons that you would expect. Pretty much because, you know, Ford have been leading the way in the way that they have done their trays. Just a standard tray just isn't good enough anymore. So what people want now, apparently anyway, what people want is they want soft drop tailgates. They want you know, little footsteps here so you can get the stuff in and out of the rear. And also, and this is probably a very reasonable one as well for people that it applies to, is having enough room between the tray intrusions for a pallet. So I believe this is a little bit short of that. However, that does not affect me as a you know, active DIYer, an avid DIYer, and you know, and four-wheel drive enthusiast. Those sorts of things don't really apply to me. So they may apply to you, and that may be something that you'll have to consider if you are looking at purchasing a ute on the market. However, I would still pick the Hilux over the Ford Ranger, which I've talked about in a previous video. Now, talking about the rear of this tray, and there is something that I really like about this, and it's something that actually, again, copped so much hate, but after 6 months of living with it, I actually really like it, and it is this bed rug. Now, this is not branded as a bed rug, although if you guys look up online what a bed rug actually does and what the company of Bedrock actually, you know, do and what they are, this is actually a very popular modification over in America, and this is like a $1,200 item. So, and you can install this in your own Hilux if you want to. It just uses Velcro, and that's it. So you can take this out at any time. If this, you know, this bothers you, you can always just rip it up and just take off the Velcro on the tray and on all the sides. And I have done that. I've taken it off and I've put it back on to put the tie downs on here, and I'll be doing the exact same thing with some more tie downs very shortly. But for me, why do I like the bed rug in here? Well, for one, it just got water on it just then, and it's actually sitting on top of the bed rug, and I'm able to just wipe it off if I want to. So it does provide an extra layer of protection, and also too, you can flog this tray. You can drag tools in and out of here. You can drag bags of soil, which I have done. As you can see, I've got quite a lot of soil and stuff in here, and you can chuck a whole bunch of stuff in here, and you know what, if you flog it at the end of the day and you rip it out and you give it a hose, it'll be good as new the next day. So obviously things like stains and stuff, it is pretty stain resistant though, but if you know, within reason, you know what I mean? So if you've got your toolbox and stuff in here, they're not going to slide around as much as a normal tray, and you're loading stuff in and out of here, and it's easier to drag out than a standard tray. But one of the things that I really like about it as well is it does provide some level of protection, both from water ingress, because if water gets in, it doesn't at least get on your stuff. But if water and dirt, if dirt does get in, it is protected at least by a layer on all of the sides. So I believe that this does provide an extra layer of protection of dirt, and I have done an off-roading video on this exact vehicle, and I've put a whole bunch of stuff in there, and I got out after something like 100 or so Ks off-road, and there was absolutely no dirt in here. Now, a common add-on that you guys will find with a lot of the competing brands as well, the higher spec utes, and also with this vehicle here, which is the EGR Roll Track. Now, it is conflicting. It's equally my favorite, but also my least favorite thing about this, the rear section of this vehicle anyway, because it looks good. It provides quite a bit of protection, also allows mounting of things like these racks very simply with just the use of a few bolts, but it is so prone to fail. In fact, after just 120 kilometers of me using it, it had already started to show signs of failure. And that's purely because the dust gets in all the slide in the mechanisms, and then, you know, you've got a complicated motor back there and everything, and it gums up so quick. So I've had to be very diligent on the old MX4, you know, in the lanolin, in all the tracks there, and I haven't had many problems since. But what I will find is that after a little while, it gets to the end and it feels like there's something there, so we'll go back and we'll actually leave your tray open. So I nearly had some troubles with that after some issues with the roll track, and then we had a big rain, but luckily I went out and checked the ute and I was able to fix it before the big rain came. So the EGR roll track is a bit of a pain, but you know, it has its function and makes it look quite nice too. But the other thing as well, guys, and all the competing utes have it as well, is this big fairing. So let's jump around the side of the ute and I'll show you exactly what my problem with the fairing is. Probably my biggest and most recent annoyance with this tray, and it's something that I wouldn't have known until now I've gone and tried to do something, which is I was looking at putting a rooftop tent, obviously not on the roof, over the tray. And I needed something like 1.5 meters, something like that. But unfortunately, you can't do that because you've got this great big fairing here, and it's in all these different pieces. So I don't know if you can take this thing apart or not. I tried looking for instructions for it, I couldn't find anything. So I'm still stuck in the swag, unfortunately. But and even if you could get rid of those fairings, the mounting for your rack only goes to here. So I've almost got it completely maxed out. So you'd be completely unbalanced on this section here. So, you know, I've had a couple of questions, Instagram messages as well. People ask me, is it possible to put a rooftop tent on here? And at this point, I have to say it isn't. Unless you can find some sort of way to get this off and put it back on again when you're done. The only other solution that I can think of is you're gonna have to take off the whole EGR roll track, get out the wiring of that too, take the fairings off that with it too, and then you'll have a blank kind of like tub, just like you would on a standard SR5. And then from there you can put a universal rack of your choosing, and then you can put a rooftop tent. And that is a lot of stuffing around to be able to do something that should be quite simple. All right, now moving on to the formidable, the powerful, the incredible 2.8 litre 4-cylinder that is here in this 2023 Hilux Rogue. It is in fact a 2.8 litre, like we've talked about before, turbo. Plenty of room in here, like I've spoken about in the past as well. Plenty of room for all sorts of, you know, gadgets and gizmos, whatever you want to put in here. But in total, this gets a lot of flack as well. The 2.8 litre direct injected diesel, and you know, I don't see the reason why. I think it is a great engine. I enjoyed it in my Prado, and I'm enjoying it now in my Hilux, and my dad is enjoying it in his Prado as well, where he is pulling a Caravan. And you know, which we will do a long-term Prado Caravan towing review, which we'll do that as well for those of you out there that are towing. But I don't have any issues with this. And I even just the other day I got a message from a bloke on Instagram, and he just picked up his new Rogue, and he is traveling around in his, I think, 3-ton Caravan. So these things can 100% tow. And for me, because I don't tow, it's even better yet, because you know, I don't need all that extra power. And for me, this has the perfect amount of power. So yes, we are now going to be talking about the engine, drivetrain, and we're also going to go on to the suspension in this next section. Now, I get asked this a lot. What is the fuel economy? Now, roughly, I've had about 9.5 litres per 100 kilometres combined. I've had most people telling me they get about that, maybe even a little bit more. I drive with a pretty soft foot. I'm not very heavy footed at all. I'm very mindful of my fuel economy as well. And you know, I don't race everywhere. Now that 9.5 litres per 100 kilometers, you have to keep in mind that most of those, embarrassingly, mostly comes from my day-to-day drive to and from work, because this is my daily vehicle. I don't just use it for off-roading. So that 9.5 liters per 100 kilometers, for me, I can expect less when I'm doing my road trips, and I absolutely get less. I get around 8.5 to 8.7, depending on the hills. This thing does not like hills. If you're going up a hill, it will absolutely destroy your fuel economy. So keep that in mind. My Prado was the same. So if you have any hills in there at all, you're probably going to average about 8.5, 8.7. That's what I average going up to the tablelands. If you're around here, you kind of get what, distances are. And if you guys are coming back down, if I'm coming back down, then I'll get around 7.5 to 8. So I'm averaging on road trips, I'm safe to say to average around 8 to 8.5 liters per 100 kilometers, but then I add in my daily driving and I'm at around 9.5 liters per 100 kilometers, which for me gets until the fuel light comes on and tells me I've got 30 kilometers or so left, apparently. I get about 700 kilometers out of a tank of fuel, which I may add an extra tank in there as well, just for my longer trips that I have coming up in the next year or so. The only negative thing I have to say about the drivetrain of this Rogue has to be with the transmission. It's different to my Prado. It is. And I said that from the very beginning. It feels different. I think it has a lot more urgency in normal mode, but it also, when I take off at a standard accelerator like pressure, so say half throttle, for example. If I'm taking off at half throttle, it will gear up to first fine, it'll gear up to second fine, but it will get to about third or fourth and it will dip back down. So it'll shift down and then it'll shift up again. And it's wasting time because, it has to go through that process of shifting down and shifting up. So I just don't understand why it does that. And when I put it into eco mode, still does the same thing. But when I put it into power mode, it shifts much better because it doesn't have that time. It's got more urgent. If you go full throttle though, it bangs through the gears fine. But if you're going through like quarter or half throttle, then it starts second guessing itself at around third or fourth gear. If you guys have the similar sort of thing in your Hiluxes or SR5s or whatever, let me know. So I'm interested to know if that's a common thing. But for me, I'm finding that I'm getting a little bit of a drop down in gear and then back up again. And it kind of annoys me. So that's why I've been driving around in power mode more often, which I'll be making a video about shortly as to why I actually drive around in power mode instead of in normal and eco mode. So the transmission, a little bit annoying. Just one of the things to keep an eye out for if you guys are interested in this vehicle in particular. Moving on to the suspension section of this video, and I do have a couple of things. Now, this is, like I've spoken about before, this does have an increased ride height compared to a standard Hilux. 100 mil from memory was the number, but I'll have to go back and have a look. It's been a while since I looked at the numbers. But just speaking again, just generally about what it has been like to live with. And I like the increased height, but I don't know why they didn't put more height in the front. For me, personally, I'm not someone who tows, I'm not someone who takes more than 400 or 500 kilos in the tray. So I just don't understand why the front is raked so much as it is. It gives it a very, very bad look in my opinion. And when I'm taking photos of this car, I have to make sure I take it from the back angle, otherwise it looks like it is tilting down far too much. So for me, that is a bit of a big annoyance, is that the front is a lot lower than the back. I think the rear tray height's fantastic. I think, what I'll end up doing is I'll probably end up putting, some upgraded suspension kit in the front, and I'll probably just leave the back exactly how it is. But it's quite a significant difference from the front to the back. In fact, what I'll do right now is I'm going to get my tape measure, and I'm going to measure it live on air. I'm going to measure it. So here we go. So from the rear, it is to the ground, it is 96 centimeters. And then in the front here, it is, and we're on flat ground here, it is 90 centimeters. So we've got a 6 centimeter difference from the front to the back. And that bothers me much more than it probably should, but it gives it a really bad look. And also I think it affects the handling dynamics as well. It really dips into corners a lot, and I feel like it needs to be leveled out a little bit. So I have seen a picture from, again, someone who sent me a message on Instagram, and they did find some sort of springs to put in the front which leveled it out. It made it look much better, and they could put slightly bigger tires on their road. Now, of course, guys, I've mentioned the turning circle at great length on this, so I'm not going to go into any more detail about that, but just know the turning circle is terrible. Now, the other thing I want to talk about with the suspension is the ride comfort. Now, I alluded to it in the interior, part of this video. The ride comfort in this vehicle is terrible. It's not good. Although this vehicle gives the impressions of being a bit like a car, and they, you know, obviously make it look like it's a bit of a mum's car and stuff like that. It isn't. It's still a work ute, and it rides still like a work ute. However, if you were doing DIY stuff around the house, or you are going on a big trip and you load up the back, this thing rides a lot better. And that is the advantage of having the leaves in the back, because I ran into a subscriber at the gym actually. Sandy is his name, and he came across to me and he said that he's got a similar year Raptor where they've got the independent suspension in the back, and his situation is actually the opposite. His rides around fine in his day-to-day life. However, when he puts a load in the back of it, when he goes camping and stuff, it starts riding terribly. So it's kind of an interesting, it's an interesting balance, isn't it? And it's something that you guys will have to make up your mind when you purchase your vehicle. But for me, I made the decision to buy a leaf sprung rear end so that when I load it up full of my gear, when I'm going camping, which is when I'm doing most of my driving, kilometers wise anyway, that gives me a nice ride for that amount of time. So it just depends. Do you want comfort in your daily drive, or do you want comfort when it's fully loaded up? Just depends on your situation. But for me, driving around day to day, the suspension on this is terrible, and you get banged around a lot. So if you've got a bad back, you probably want to avoid it, or put new suspension in the back, or look at a different model of vehicle. But for me, I can put up with it day to day, knowing that when I do load up with a few hundred kilos of gear, a couple hundred kilos of gear at least anyway, then on shorter trips, then I at least know that it's going to be riding pretty good, and it's not going to be riding terribly when I get off-road. Because when I'm going off-road, guess what? I've got all my camping stuff as well. So very rarely I'll go off-road and I've got nothing in the back. So just something to consider, something that I've noticed over the last 6 months. And thank you to Sandy as well for coming and having a chat with me. It was awesome to have a chat with you and you know, get your perspective on how the Raptor is compared to the Rogue. Now, something that surprised me about driving this Hilux, even just for the first time, was just how good the brakes are in it. And it's because it's for the first time that Hilux decided to put a rear disc brake setup in their Hiluxes. And tell you what, they should have done this a long time ago, but this thing stops on a dime. I absolutely love how this thing brakes. If you stand on these brakes, this thing will stop. I would love to see a comparison of how this thing stops compared to a standard SR5, but these rear brakes are unreal, guys. I cannot compliment Toyota enough on the job that they did on these rear brakes, and gives me that confidence just knowing that when I do need to stop in a hurry, stand on the brakes, and I'll stop basically. And you know, I think for towing and stuff as well, you don't need to go and get a brake upgrade, because you know, the brakes on this are so fantastic. So that's something as well to think about. Now, how does it compare to the vehicles I've owned in the past? Well, how it compares to my Patrol is that my Patrol barely stops, so already it's doing much better than that one. But how does it compare to, say, my 2021 Prado and also my dad's 2022 Prado? This stops a lot better and with a lot more urgency than the Prado. With the Prado, you really have to stand on that brake to get it to do anything, really. I feel that the brake feel isn't that great in those vehicles, but in this vehicle, it is. 2023 Hilux Rogue brakes are excellent. So for the second last section of this video, we're going to be talking about my experience with the technology of this vehicle. Now, again, a very heavily criticized aspect of this vehicle is the lack of technology compared to its competitors, but we're going to get into that a little bit in this section. Now, when we're talking about technology, this thing does the basics very well, and that's going to be a big theme of this video, this part of the video anyway, is the basics done well. The safety features in that all work fine. You know, you're talking about your airbags and collision warnings and that sort of stuff. I have no issues with it. My opinion is it works fantastically. Now we start getting into some of the wants and needs of the technology in the interior as well. But when we're talking about the interior, things like the air conditioning I've already spoken about, not too happy with it. It does take a bit of time to cool down the car, and it does cool you down at weird angles. And it also, if you've got someone small in the car, whether it's a child or, you know, dog, for example, you're trying to cool them down, it does cool it down from a very high angle. So it's very hard to get that angle down closer towards the bottom of the seat. So just keep that in the back of your mind as well. So Ginger takes a little bit of time to cool down because I can't get the angle of that aircon exactly right. Now, when we're talking about features, Things like, and this is something that not a lot of people actually know, and people criticize this vehicle before it even came out about the technology in it, and the fact that it actually does have a trail cam. It does, up to a certain speed. And you don't need a trail cam below a certain speed. I think it was 15 kilometers an hour. I tested it anyway. If you want to check out that video in the off-road review, you guys can do that. Actually, I made a separate video just for that, that 360-degree camera using it as a trail cam. So if you want to have a look at that, feel free to do that, and it gives you a bit of an idea on how you can use the technology in this off-road. But they don't advertise that as a trail cam. They just say it's got 360 panoramic camera, you know? So I think they're selling themselves a little bit short on that one, old Toyota. But it does have the 360-degree camera, and I can use the multimedia screen as well to split screen it. So it gives me an idea of where I am in the park, and also tells me what my trajectory is as well, you know, in the park, which is handy because this thing is a bit tricky to park. So in terms of all your features, it's got, you know, your wired CarPlay, not wireless, so things like that. And yes, the head unit is very small, so some people are going to have issues with that. But I don't know about you guys, but when I'm driving, I don't stare at my head unit. And when I can, and when I do need to, like if it's just at a glance, I'm picking a song on Spotify, whatever it is, I can do that at a glance because the screen's in a good spot. And, you know, I mean, how big of a screen do you need? That's my opinion. Anyway, lots of people argue that, you know, every car needs a Tesla screen in it now. But give me, and I've said this before, and I'm going to keep saying it, give me the knobs and dials every single day of the week, and I will take it over having to change things with buttons and, you know, and on screens. My opinion, take it or leave it, but I much prefer manual controls, and I hope that in the new vehicles coming out by Toyota that they do keep a lot of the manual features, because I think that's what most of us appreciate. Most, not all. So, you know, who knows? It might just be me, who knows? Now, when we're talking about the technology, can't compete with a Ranger. It just can't. You know, the Fords are well ahead at the moment, and the sales are showing this now as well. So I'm not standing here saying that, oh, this is the, you know, best-selling vehicle. It isn't, and it won't be for the next couple of years until Toyota bring out their next model of vehicle. And then in that case, I'm going to say that at that point, it's going to probably overtake the Fords, depending what they do. Who knows? You never know. Now, in regards to the technology, a positive and a negative as well is the 15 amp output in the tray. Awesome for running things like your fridge, which I've demonstrated in the past as well through camping trips, that you can actually run your fridge in very hot climates for at least 6 hours. So off the battery, because you've got about 20 hours of usable battery using the Century. It's branded differently, but using the Century, it's kind of like a dual battery where it uses a starter, but it also has some extra power left over that you can use for accessories when you get out of the car. So interesting fact, you can still run a fridge once you pull up to camp. So I didn't have a dual battery in this vehicle for quite a long time, and I was still able to use the factory 15 amp in the back, which was super handy for charging everything, cameras, you know, my fridge, all sorts of things. But what I did notice is when I went off-road is that because it's just a standard, you know, cigarette socket, it's a standard accessory socket, once you get off-road, it just wiggled straight out. So on-road, it was fine, but once I went off-road, the fridge unplugged like straight away. So I just had, every time I pulled over, you know, to have a swim or whatever, I just had to make sure I plugged it back in. Bit annoying, but, you know, I'm sure some zip ties could probably fix it. Or if you wanted to mess around with the wiring a little bit, change it to an Anderson plug. But for me, I only use that when I pull up to camp anyway. Sometimes I do use that extra 20 or so, however many amps that's in that starter battery. But what I typically use is the 45 amps I've got under there of usable power anyway. And I've also got my EcoFlow and yeah, I've also got my Blue Eddy as well. So I've got a couple of different power setups to help me. But you know, if you guys are just want a basic setup, get one of these. You can still use your fridge while you're driving around, and when you pull up to camp, just use a very basic and relatively cheap power station. That's my recommendation. Anyway, a little bit off topic, but there you go. Now, with the technology, in summary, I think it's got the perfect amount of technology. I actually don't want any more, and I'm still finding things in this vehicle as well. Someone told me the other day to click the auto button, and then it actually, when you slow down to a certain speed, it tells you where you are in the road. So when you park, it makes it easier. So yeah, appreciate that. Thank you to those people in the comment section. You guys are so handy. But again, just another thing that I'm finding out, that this thing probably has too much technology for me anyway. I've come from very basic vehicles, and then now, obviously we got a very nice new fancy vehicle, which I'm very lucky to have, but I'm still trying to figure out all the technology in it as well. But just goes to show, I don't need any more than this. But if you're used to technology, maybe you've come from a newer vehicle as well, and who knows, maybe you want more technology out of a vehicle. But for me, when I'm going off-road, I don't have time to be looking at the screen and playing around with that. So for me, perfect amount of technology, buttons, knobs, dials, whatever. I'm very happy with it. So this is the last section before we get into the final thoughts on this 2023 Hilux Rogue, where I'll summarize all of the points we've talked about and let you know what I actually think about it and is it worthwhile purchasing. Now, the last topic I want to talk about is the Modability. So, very technical word, isn't it? But how easy, and I talked about this with my Prado after I owned that for the 18 months so that I had it for. How easy is this to mod? And I gave my Prado a very high rating of Modability. We'll call it a 10 out of 10 for mods, because everything on it was so easy. It came with the factory sports rails, which meant that you were able to unplug the old one, unscrew the old one, unbolt the old ones, and you're able to put your own system on the top. So whether I went with the Rhino rack system on the top, and that worked very well for me, and that was something I was able to do in a day. So again, something that and of course with the wagon, all I had to do is just unbolt a few seats and I had a perfectly easy to work with flat space. So in terms of Modability, very simple in the Prado, very good. I was very happy with it. But with this, guys, it is so hard to modify the Hilux. Everything from the seats not folding down makes it difficult, okay? Not having a big enough area to put a full-size lithium battery in there, for me it's fine, but for people who are like going on a big trip and you've got all your kids in the car and stuff, you're not going to have any cabin space to do what I do, which is I put my battery on the passenger seat. Not everyone's going to have that space. So where do you put it then? You have to put it in the engine bay. And I could do it myself. I absolutely could do it. But it's a brand new car and I didn't want to do it myself. So I had to pay someone to do it for me. So I had to pay a professional to install it. It was a dealership, but I had to pay the dealership to do it for me. And that's something again that I couldn't do myself, because you have to run the wiring all the way from the engine bay all the way to the back. So again, quite a complex thing to do. Now, probably my biggest gripe again is probably going to be to do with that tray and the fact that you can't get those fairings off, or it's very difficult. Haven't figured it out yet. If you know how to do it, let me know. Or if you have a link, please put it down in the comment section. But that fairing is stopping you from putting more stuff on there, like a bigger tray rack or like putting a rooftop tent over your tray. Now, if you're talking about roof racks, do not get me started, because I really wanted a roof rack again, just for basic stuff like my Max Tracks and a solar panel, pretty simple stuff. But guess what? This does not have a actual bolt thread to bolt into, because these don't come factory with a roof rack or a sports rails or anything like that. So if you want to put a roof rack on this, you have to drill into the skin of the roof, and then you need to put it's a sandwich plate design, or you need to rivet a pop rivet a track in there, which I'm not doing, because I've seen enough YouTube channels to know that's a bad idea. Shout out to Tyler Thompson, who told us his whole experience of pop riveting into roof skins. So, and I don't want that. I don't want that. No, I want things that are going to go on here that's going to be solid and it's going to work. So in terms of Modability, the roof rack is a no-go as well. So things like the wiring and the tray, pretty much every section of this vehicle, from the wiring to the roof rack and the interior setup, such as the electrical setup, which would normally go into the cabin of a Prado and things like that. But instead, and then you've got problems with the roof rack and you've got problems with the tray rack. It just seems like every time I want to do something on this, there is a problem. But for every problem, there is a solution. So you just got to be a little bit creative about what you're doing. So for me, I don't feel like the lack of Modability is holding me back to doing what I want to do. I may in the future go with a roof rack, but at this point I do not need it. And you know what? I probably will avoid a roof rack because I think they look hideous on dual cab utes, my opinion, again. But The other thing I wanted to say was that if I'm not going with a roof rack, then which I don't really want to, is that putting something like a canopy over the tray will give you a roof rack anyway if you pick the right models and you have certain add-ons and stuff like that. So for me, I'll probably end up at some point, not anytime soon because I don't have the money for it, but taking the rear section off, the roll track, get rid of all that stuff. So once that all dies, I'm gonna rip it all off and I'm going to put a canopy on the back. And I think it's gonna look pretty awesome, but it's also going to give us a spot to mount either a rooftop tent or to strap the swags down to. So I still have access to the full tray setup. So if I was to give this a modability rating on a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 10, I'd probably give it maybe like a 5, because there are still some things that you can do yourself, like putting the roll track rack that I've got on the back there. That's from Front Runner. So that has gone on quite well, and that has been an absolute game changer for people love that word, but I'm going to use it here. It's been a game changer for carrying things, because once I had all my stuff in the tray, I had no space for my swag. So yeah, having that rack up there gives me an opportunity to put a cargo box and also a swag, and I've got all the interior space as well to put all of my other things. So not a complete write-off, so I'd say, yeah, something like a 5 out of 10 I'd give this thing. And yeah, and that's my opinion on the modability of the 2023 Hilux Rogue. So it's time, guys, for my final thoughts. And when I sat down to write some points for this section of the video, I struggled. I struggled because I can't tell you guys it's great value, because it isn't. It just isn't. You've got your Ford Rangers and that are doing a lot more for less. You've got, even the models in the Toyota lineup that, like the SR5, for example, that does pretty much exactly the same thing, just without some of the things like the suspension changes and the brake changes and stuff like that. You've got all that, and it's cheaper. So I can't tell you that it's great value. But, and this is where the notes will go away, and it's in the fact that it's the way that I'm connecting with this vehicle. It's the way that I am building a relationship with this vehicle over the trips that I'm doing. You look at the vehicle on the road, and it's got a soul. It's got you look at it, and it's got that style about it. It's got that aggressive look. And in my opinion, I think that this vehicle is going to become, because it stands out and it's a kind of like a special one. And I don't think they're going to make this for very long, guys, because they've got the new model of Hilux coming in. So in my opinion, I think this is going to be a collector's vehicle 15, 20 years from now, because it's got the wide body and looks different to all the other Hiluxes that they've been making since whatever, 2015 or whatever it is. So in my opinion, I think this is going to be a collector's vehicle, which is something you can't put a price on. I also think that it has a bit of a soul, like, yeah, the dashboard creaks, and and I get this weird tick in the transmission tunnel and stuff like when I'm driving. And it's like, don't get me wrong, like, I'm not making excuses here and saying that that's all part of the charms of it, but for me it kind of is. I felt like the Toyota Prado was an excellent vehicle. Oh, I cannot recommend the Prado enough. And I would, if I had to go with another wagon again, I would go straight to the Prado. Fantastic vehicle. But to me, it just didn't have soul. And that's what this vehicle is for me. It's a vehicle that's got soul. It's red, it looks different. It's got the black, the black over fenders. And I think that this vehicle, although it doesn't do a lot well, it does a little bit really, really well. And that's things like the factory lift in the vehicle, and so it gives you more chances of putting a bigger lift in the vehicle later on, and bigger wheels and tires. And it's got this look about it, and for me, it's got this feel about it when you drive it as well, that I feel like I'll be able to live with this vehicle for not just 6 months, not just 18 months like I had the Prado for, but for me, I think I'll be able to hang on to this vehicle forever. And I am planning on hanging on to this vehicle as a forever car. So if that gives you anything to go by, and I probably ranted and raved a little bit, because there's some things that you just can't put, you can't put a finger on, and when I drove around the Prado, it was fantastic. It was a great vehicle, but you just blended in with the rest of everybody else, all the other white Prados out there, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like I said, I love the Prado, but for me, I wanted something different. You know, I wanted something that, you know, kind of a bit of a reflection of you, you know, something that was an extension of what we believe as off-roaders. And as an off-roader and as a tourer and whatever you want, as a camper, I look at this thing camped up, you know, parked up at camp, and I just think how awesome it is. And I'll just look at it sometimes and I just love it. And that's the important thing. You guys have to love your vehicle. If it was me and I had a choice between this and the SR5 or this and a Ranger or this and I'm going this every time, guys. I am. I'm sorry, and I know that everyone's going to say, oh, you're biased because you actually went out and bought one. And you know what? Call me biased if you want, but I do not want a different car. This is going to serve my needs for long into the future, and I think it's a fantastic vehicle. The Ute offers a lot of flexibility, more so than the wagon, in my opinion, and it suits my lifestyle more. So now, is it worth it? Say over something like an SR5 or over a Ranger? I think it is. I like the leaf sprung back. I do. I was very skeptical of it first, but now that I've owned one for a while, I see the advantages of it. And, you know, over say something like an SR5, it's going to require a whole separate video in itself, because there's a lot to dissect there. But, you know, the upgraded rear brake, those rear brakes are insane. A lot better than the Prado anyway, which surprised me. But overall, you know, I can't, with the price difference between this and the SR5 of only being, I think when I calculated it, it was about $5 or $6 grand. And I found the bed rug and the suspension and the brakes and all that sort of stuff, for me, it was well worth it. So in total, in summary, I think this is a fantastic vehicle. I've owned it for 6 months, a little bit over 6 months now. And I think it was a great decision. I think that it's created a lot of interest as well for you guys, because it's, you know, this is a vehicle that stars here on the channel. So it has to have some sort of, you know, intrigue, some sort of interest. So I think it's done that. You guys have asked me a lot of questions about it, and that's been fantastic having these conversations. And it has done exactly that. You know, it's created a lot of conversations, and, you know, I pull up to certain places with it and people kind of, hey, what's that? You know, it looks a little bit different to what Toyota have been doing. And this is something that I really want to encourage. And I don't think Toyota or anyone actually watches these videos, of course. It's just us that watch these videos. But if there are car manufacturers out there that are making something different, I think that we should at least try and support what they're doing, if we have the means to. So, for example, this became available and I was intrigued and I wanted to see how it went and could it suit my life as well. And it did. And it's something really different. And I hope that gives Toyota that feedback that as car enthusiasts, as four-wheel drive enthusiasts, as campers, we want this sort of stuff. We want this sort of R&D, this sort of different. If they just keep doing the same thing over and over again and no one buys the stuff that they step out of their comfort zone to try and do, then they're just going to keep making the same old stuff. So I hope that this, you know, and other people as well watching this and that have gone out and purchased one of these as well, they've kind of looked at, you know, I hope that Toyota have looked at it and had a good think and have looked at the numbers. And I hope the numbers are good, because I really want car manufacturers to try and step out of their comfort zone and offer more to us. Back in the day, we had options of engines going in vehicles. I remember when I bought my first Mitsubishi Lancer, and you could get that in like 5 or 6 different trims with 2 different engines, with options of spoilers and nod and roof racks and nod. But now it just seems like that flexibility isn't there anymore. You just kind of get the car and that's it, you know? So I want car manufacturers to start looking at these vehicles and start looking at the sales, start looking at the feedback, and maybe think, you know what, maybe that we can do different stuff to these vehicles. Maybe we can modify them at different factories here in Australia, for example, like this one was, and then sell them on, not at a huge amount of price, extra anyway, and will people still buy them? And can we still cater to that? Maybe it's only the 1% of the people that buy it to buy this, but what it will do is create brand loyalty. And I really like the fact that Toyota have gone out of their way. And you know what? I applaud Ford with their Raptor as well. It's the exact same concept. But for me, you know, I love my Toyotas. I do. You know, I also have Nissan Patrol, but I love my Toyotas because they just work. And that's what I'm going to leave you guys with, is although I've ranted and raved a little bit, I think that this vehicle, for me, it just works. But not only does it just work, it also looks awesome. And that's something that I don't think I've seen from Toyota much. Until recently with the GR Corollas and the GR Yaris's and all that sort of stuff. I think, and you know, the GR Hilux is going to be coming out soon as well. So if you want to hang out for that one, you can. I don't see anything that interests me in that vehicle personally. But again, I have to applaud Toyota because they're going out of their way to try to create these different vehicles. So for me, this vehicle just works. It is Toyota reliability. And on top of all that, it also looks as awesome as it does with the improved suspension, the improved brakes, and I couldn't be happier with my purchase. So if this review has helped you, please consider commenting. Let me know what you think of it. Do you own one? I'd like to know what you think of it as well, because everyone I've talked to that has owned one, they really like it. So I'd like to hear if maybe there's some dissatisfied customers out there. Let me know. And as well, just you guys watching at home, maybe you're considering it, maybe just watching this because you want to see what it's about. I would really like to hear what you think about it. Now that we're 6 months on and all the hype has died down, I'd love to hear what you guys think of this 2023 Hilux Rogue. And thank you so much for joining me in today's very detailed review. I hope some of the information that I gave you will help you if you're making a decision on purchasing one, or if you just want to find out a little bit more about the vehicle. I appreciate you all watching, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you very shortly in the next video. Take care.